Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second session today of our meeting, Making the Invisible Visible. We have another distinguished panel with us here today. And I'll just start by giving some opening remarks, and then we'll do turns for our speakers, and then we'll have a Q&A period, during which also we'll be inviting our online listeners and webcam viewers to also pose questions, which we'll be receiving online. We know that gender inequality in the recording of vital events often starts at birth, continues in marriage and old age, and persists into death, as women's deaths are less likely to be registered. However, for women, we know there's a life cycle for girls and for women. There's a whole life cycle of being discounted and uncounted, from birth to marriage to death. Taken together, this makes it difficult for governments to plan appropriate policies and programs across the life course for the population, and especially for women. This also raises some challenging questions at the global level. How can we progress global development policy if data on gender inequality is not available? And how do we know which women and where are the most disadvantaged? How do we reach them? How for economic development programs? How do we reach them for education programs? How do we reach them for social services? The lack of legal identity and marital status and birth registration can often hinder the exercises of national governments or policies of implementation of national policies by governments that are trying to address the disadvantaged situation of some women. Sustainable development goals seek to eliminate poverty and create better life conditions for everyone, with gender equality as a precondition. But for this, we must have data which covers key population dimensions, which can be disaggregated geographically and by age and sex, and which accurately reflects the status of women, including their rights and disadvantages. It will come as no surprise to this audience, with your experience in CRVS systems and CRVS components, that the challenge for the CRVS community is not necessarily about the how, but in terms of, is in the how, not in terms of the why. We all know what needs to be done, but it's the how we are going to do it, and how are we going to make the systems sustainable and viable for the long term. Only then will data serve to guide better policies and programs, particularly for the underserved and hard to reach, the overwhelming majority of whom are women and children. Today and in the coming days at the Innovation Conference, we should be challenging ourselves to answer hard questions in terms of the inclusive design of data collection systems such as CRVS. One of the challenges I would like to pose to this panel today is how do we consider the gaps, as we consider the gaps in our roles, our roles, is to consider women not only as disadvantaged populations that are not counted, but we also consider them as agents of change. How can we be more inclusive of women to be partners, to be active partners in improving CRVS and data systems in their countries? To do this, we should be asking ourselves the hard questions, and these are some of the questions we'll be asking ourselves throughout the day, but also in the upcoming conference. So the questions are, or some of the questions are: to what extent are we and the country and regional and global leaders strengthening the position of women within CRVS systems by design, not by chance? To what extent are we actively including women in the design of CRVS systems from the point of view of their roles as mothers registering their children, or as women marrying or divorcing, or as family members registering death? To what extent are we challenging the existing gender-blind barriers in statistical collection, including for CRVS? This is not a surprise for statisticians and CRVS experts. But those barriers have prevented women in the past from actively participating in data collection, including as key informants to registering vital events. Finally, to what extent do our global tools and guidance encourage the view of women as key resources for CRVS systems, as members of households and as community leaders who can advise on key life events? What role could there be for significant women in many communities as health workers, for example? We need to look at how we have systems that enable women to be a resource, not only emphasize their disadvantaged position, but also as empowered active agents of change for improving CRVS systems in countries and in the regions. In this session, we must consider whether our CRVS system and our role within it can be made less gender blind and more gender transformative. This is the spirit within which we are opening this session today, and I'll be welcoming the speakers one at each time, and we'll start with Rachel Snow. And I would like to just give a little bio of Rachel before she comes to the podium. Rachel Snow, BA, DSC, is the Chief Population and Development Branch, is the Chief of the Population and Development Branch at UNFPA. She has more than 25 years experience conducting research on the burden of sexual and reproductive health, gender differentials in health, access to health services, and the gendered vulnerabilities of young people. Trained as a population scientist and reproductive biologist, her early research was on contraceptive, clinical trials, and the burden of reproductive health in poor countries. Please welcome Rachel Snow with me.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So thank you so much. That was my old life, and since I joined UNFPA, I'm living the world of census and CRVS most recently. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. In fact, I'm speaking today at a moment when UNFPA is very much trying to rethink and reconfigure what our strategy will be in the context of civil registration and vital statistics. Since I joined UNFPA 2 years ago with the 2020 census round, looking at us very, very quickly, we've focused really most of our attention in that direction. And it's really been in the last 4 to 6 months that we've been debating and polling our 120 country offices, what are we doing in CRVS and what should we be doing? And I'm going to speak today about 2 key issues that we're really interested in. The first is the value of a really comprehensive approach to civil registration that includes the evaluation of civil registration coverage by using other population data in systems. And I want to thank our colleague from DevCo who really talked about the problem of silos and lack of integration, because we see that, and we see, goodness, as census use experts, perhaps we can play a role to bring a bit more of these systems together. The second is we've been really struck by the lack of data and coverage on marriage and divorce registration. And I know I'm speaking to a community that has a lot of focus on birth registration, but we have been particularly interested in the absence of data with regard to marriage. And I want to thank Ms. Askar from ESCAP for drawing attention to that this morning. It's impressive the way the international community has focused on this kind of 10-year investment led by WHO and the World Bank on civil registration. And yet again, we look and we see that the lion's share of investments thus far seem to be more focused on birth particularly, but also birth, death, and cause of death certification. In part, that seems to reflect the fact that thanks to the DHS and the mix, we have data about coverage of birth registration in quite a number of countries, and hence that seems to be focusing us. But at the same time, for people interested in child marriage, goodness, it's that combination of birth registration plus marriage registration that gives the state the instrument to try and protect young women from early marriage, and gives civil society the kind of data they need also to play a pivotal role. We've heard that marriage registration is important for birth registration, but I'd like to really emphasize that marriage registration is critical for the empowerment of women in the financial domain and everything to do with property rights and the ability to have access to custody of children, custody of property, if there should be a divorce or a separation. We see a few countries that are doing a very nice job trying to integrate their thinking and approach. I note Bangladesh, where a birth certificate now provides you access to a marriage recognition. So again, nice approach, and I think we need to see more of that. We also recognize that even though we're in countries and work with a lot of governments very closely, that actually thinking about all these vital events would engage multiple different ministries and organizations within the government, so that this will be a little more challenging than perhaps just dealing with census, where we deal with the NSO. So Ministry of Interior, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Justice, etc. First, on the integration of data, however, Ramesh Silva is going to present to you this afternoon a very nice body of work where he shows that by looking at the balance between two censuses and the existing civil registration system, ideally informed by a very nice DHS or mix estimate of the coverage of birth registration, exposes the biases and the deficiencies in death registration. And the paper he's going to present this afternoon, without stealing his thunder, uncovers pretty dramatic distinctions between male death registration and female death registration. So we're very interested in this integration of the different population data systems and what that could offer to try to uncover deficiencies in the CR system. And our plan, as yet, is to take what Ramesh has done in Morocco and to roll that out in a larger number of countries over the next year or two. Now, in the context of marriage and divorce registration, again, what we looked at is, MIX and DHS have done this tremendous public service in generating the data on coverage. At the same time, we see so little on marriage, but we're involved in the census. And UN Statistics Division, represented here, of course, by a number of leaders, are also very involved in of course, what actually gets collected in the context of census. We advise governments very directly on the questionnaire, and one of our commitments is to try to look much more concertedly with governments about not only collecting data on marriage, type of marriage, but on whether or not you have some kind of certificate of marriage. And in the context of divorce, do you have a certificate in divorce? And we think that if we could accomplish that even in a fraction of countries over this census round, we could do a great service for all of us in terms of recognizing where needs are really extreme. You look at the laws, and I'm not a lawyer nor a legal scholar by any stretch, but I think that the evidence is pretty clear that without marriage registration, women are extremely, let's say, discriminated against in the context of property, inheritance, etc. We have some interesting examples of the law shifting in directions to provide better protection for women. And I would cite South Africa. I think I have a colleague here from South Africa. And I recognize that in 1998, South Africa changed the law so that customary marriages can now be registered. And I would love to hear how, from 1998, how that's actually shifted the extent of marriage registration in the country. I think that's a question for all of us, whether that's a model where in a direction that the continent or other countries could move. And I understand that in the context of South Africa, there's even a conversation now, there's been a draft bill to recognize cohabitation. So I think these begin to potentially move us in a direction where better data would help governments begin to think about protecting women. In sum, UNFPA is embarking on a new initiative here, and our two components to that largely will be in the analysis of multiple sources of population data to try to improve data on coverage, and in the second, to work on what we can do to improve the quality of data on marriage coverage and types of marriage. And we really look forward to working with all of you in the course of the next few years and months. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rachel, especially for keeping under the 10 minutes. This is appreciated. I'm sure we'll have more time for the discussion this way. Now I would like to present our next speaker, Francesca Perucci, who is the Assistant Director of the UN Statistics Division, where she oversees the work on SDGs and other data on global monitoring initiatives. Ms. Perucci initiated her career in the UN as an advisor on gender and social statistics. Since then, she has served in different positions within the UN system, where she has been an active leader in developing and promoting the use of statistics and indicators to inform development policies and review and monitor progress. Please welcome Francesca with me. Thank you.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Good morning, colleagues. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to thank my friends and colleagues from IDRC for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here and share my thoughts and be part of this discussion. It's really amazing to see the momentum and the interest in this area. I'm really happy to see that. As was mentioned, I started in gender statistics, so this was our dream like 25 years ago, that we would have this discussion. But today I'd like to speak more from the angle of the SDGs and what CRVS means in the context of the SDGs. So we heard a lot about the data needs for the SDGs and the importance of data disaggregation, but I'd like to stress that again, because I truly believe that having data disaggregated is the essence of the agenda, and we cannot go anywhere without the data. And I'm not talking about indicators, although those, of course, are important, but that's just one side of the story. It's even more important to have data to inform policies and to really reach all the ones that have never been counted. So how do we do that? One message, of course, there are many strategies, important strategies and important work being done on many fronts, but one important message I think I'd like to give here today is integration of data sources. So what was also mentioned by the previous speaker, the importance of considering all data sources together and finding ways to integrate the traditional and non-traditional data sources and leveraging technology and innovation. Although, again, that's not the whole story, as we heard just this morning from the colleague from the EU. You know, it's not just having the perfect technology that solves all the problems. So, what is CRVS in the SDGs? The way I'd like to see it is it's important as a data source, of course, first of all, for the monitoring. And I'm sure the different counts of how many indicators can be derived from CRVS. I counted 16 directly and 48 indirectly for sex disaggregation. And of course, it's important for data, for the denominator of all indicators. But it's also very important as data for the implementation of the agenda. And that's, again, to inform policies and intervention and programs. So just to give examples, you know, integrating population census and CRVS for estimates of small areas, planning health services in all at the subnational level, in particular in crisis due to natural disasters or other phenomena. So that's just to give the many, many more examples. But just to stress the fact that as data source, we have to keep in mind this is important for both monitoring, but more importantly for implementation of the agenda. But it's also important as a target in itself, as sort of from the governance perspective. CRVS are a key component of a strong statistical system. We cannot have a strong statistical system without a good functioning civil registration system from which we can derive the statistics that we need. It's important, of course, and that's been covered from all the previous speakers extensively with very important examples, is, you know, legal identity, birth registration in terms of good governance and protection of human rights from all different angles. It's also important in particular from the gender perspective. And again, the previous speaker very cover really well, all the aspects related to the not just the birth registration, but also marriage and divorce registration that are absolutely essential for protection of women's rights from the point of view, inheritance, but many other aspects. And of course, birth registration linked to as a legal backing against forced and early marriage. But these, again, are just some of the example. This is just to stress the importance of CRVS as a basic function of government. So that's why within the SDGs, we look at both target 17.19, which is more from the statistical point of view, but of course under goal 16 from the human rights point of view. So what are the priorities? I'd like to say, of course there is a challenge, and that again was mentioned in the morning, from the previous speakers. The challenge is that we don't have one counterpart. We work at the UN Statistics Division. We work through the Statistical Commission, the UN Statistical Commission, our main intergovernmental body. But of course, that's just one part of the different parts of the government that need to be involved. And so that's already the first big challenge, bringing together the different parts of the government. In the UN, we've done that, and in fact, all our programs and capacity building programs do bring together the main three actors in the government, the health ministry, the statistical system, the civil registry. But that's not enough, because that's just one entry point. There needs to be really an effort to bring together also from the global perspective all these different actors. And then, of course, the fact that civil registration is not necessarily developed always with statistics in mind. So it's very important, especially from the gender perspective, to look at the content, how that is developed. But the SDGs, I think, represent an opportunity to really raise the political visibility of CRVS and so somehow raise the awareness of the importance of developing CRVS. And it can also somehow increase the demand side. I'm sure everybody knows the importance of having the demand side strengthened. And somehow having this so visible and bringing the political importance of CRVS within the SDGs might help making that, strengthening that message. And of course, we also have a very big opportunity. The SDGs have brought this sense of, the urgency of creating and establishing partnerships with all different stakeholders, private sector, civil society. So again, that's an opportunity to really bring these different actors together and help us make progress. And new technology, of course, I mentioned earlier, increased coverage of cell phones, increased tools for data interoperability, so making all different systems in the country interoperable, etc. So how do we move forward? I was asked to say, what the UN role could be. And of course, my answer is, first of all, let's look at the Cape Town action, the plan of action for sustainable development data, which is now the most important instrument we have in the statistical community for strengthening statistical systems. And under strategic area 3, of course, we mention the importance of developing CRVS. So this is our sort of these are our marching orders for the statistical community. So keeping in mind that this is where we want to be, what can we do? Of course, we need to integrate the development of CRVS into national development strategies. So looking at all parts of government that are involved in developing the system. Sorry, excuse me. We need to work with all different parts of government to raise awareness. And since now there is momentum to really encourage all parts to make serious commitments to move forward, I think this is a good opportunity to make progress. We need to integrate the development of civil registration and vital statistics systems as a key data source in our strategies for the development of statistics. So that's key, and it has to be there. And the other thing I'd like to mention is there is still this debate of household surveys versus CRVS. And I remember there was an argument my dear friend Hans Rosling used to bring, and I always think of him when I struggle. What's the right balance? We know there is a big investment to be made when it comes to civil registration, but and I know there is a school of thought that says, well, we need data immediately for the SDGs, so let's use household surveys for the most urgent needs. But I think there is a balance there, and we have to realize that yes, there is a larger investment initially, but then it's very cheap to get data. I mean, cheaper than household surveys to some extent. So I think that's a discussion that needs to happen, and we have to really strike a balance between all these data sources that we have for the SDGs. And finally, I'd like to mention the instruments that we have at the global level. We have a high-level group that sort of oversees the implementation of the action plan, the Cape Town action plan. So we really have to bring that to them and make sure that that's really in their implementation plans that's considered extensively. We have a subgroup on financing. Again, it has to be there. The CRVS have to be funded appropriately in all countries. And we have new work streams within the interagency and expert group that deals with the SDG indicators, and the new city group within the Statistical Commission that also deals with aging statistics and age disaggregated data. So again, we need to bring this to them and make sure that they put it in their plans and they move this program, this agenda forward. And then finally, we need to make sure that we bring the work of the statistical community to the political level, because that's where you need the commitment to happen. So link the statistical discussion at the UN Statistical Commission or in other fora to the HLPF, the High-Level Political Forum, or ECOSOC, all the other global intergovernmental processes in the UN where these commitments are made and where the funding and the political decisions are made. So I'd like to stop here. And I think I already went over time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Francesca. I raised really some important points. I don't want to pick on the points of the speakers because I know we'll have the discussion, not pick on them. I mean, take them up because they're really interesting points, but I want to save the time for the fuller discussion. Now, our next speaker is Haishan, who is the director of the World Bank's Development Data Group, overseeing its global development monitoring and open data initiatives, surveys, and other technical services, and global statistical programs such as the International Comparison Program. She also leads and coordinates the development and implementation of the bank's development data agenda. Ms. Fu has been an active leader in the global statistical community, having served on the UN Secretary General's Independent Expert Advisory Group on Data Revolution for Sustainable Development and is Council of International Institute of Statistics. Previously, she's led the statistics program at UNESCAP and UNDP's Human Development Report Office and worked as a senior researcher. She also holds a PhD in demography from Princeton University and the BA in economics from Peking University. Welcome, Haishan Fu, with me, please.
Thank you. You can tell that I have all my life events registered properly. Thank you very much. It's really a great pleasure to join you all here. I think you might have all noticed Shaida's tweet before she came here to Ottawa. She said, promising sign for the first time, international experts coming together to discuss CRVS and gender. Indeed, I came with very much the same spirit, but also kind of mixed feeling in the sense I feel that there's so much more could be done, should be done, and we're not moving fast enough. But at least it's great. We're all here together to really try to advance this agenda. Since we're all converted and committed, so I won't get into irritating, why we're trying to link the gender and CRVS agenda together, but rather to just offer a few thoughts on what I see as the important role of donor agencies or partners, and to give you a quick sense of what the bank has been doing. Let me be a little bit blunt. First of all, I think one important role is that as donor agencies, we need to really be better thought leaders. As I have a sense that there's a lot of intuitive understanding about why strong CRVS systems are important for addressing gender gaps. But there's not sufficient solid research and evidence base for us to really demonstrate exactly why and how good CRVS systems would support gender equality. Here, I want to really recognize Data2X, who has undertaken some very important research in this area. And also this new Center of Excellence is also committed to become a source of resource of knowledge and share good research and evidence. So I think this is fantastic. But we need to really work together. I know part of it's because we don't have sufficient data for us to address this issue. But with more progress, we need to be much more proactive to become the thought leader and advocate with solid evidence. Second, it's about how we promote innovation and the credible application of new technology. This is something I've been thinking about for a long time, and having been the guilty party of those demographers who have been developing and applying fancy imputation and indirect estimation models for many years to address the fact that we don't have sufficient functioning civil registration vital statistics systems. So we have relied too much on those indirect approach. But I'm glad we're finally coming around to build basic government systems and trying to, writing on the 2030 agenda and really try to address this once for all. Why this time around we feel it's much more feasible and viable? Of course, if you look around for the leaps and bounds of how technology has been evolving and how affordable technology has become, we really believe that this time we're on much better footing. But it is very important as donor partners with government and other players, we really need to look into what will be the most credible technological applications to help country to lead forward from paper-based system to digital age. And here, I want to really echo what our EU colleague has stressed. It's not just about technology application. It is about really looking at from legal arrangement, institutional capacity, to the issue of privacy and other governance issues that we will need to indeed come to terms with. Thirdly, of course, the role of donors is to use our convening power and leverage partnership to channel financing to support countries. And of course, improving civil registrations and vital statistics system, first and foremost, is the commitment and responsibility of national government. But given we know how much is needed, we need to indeed put our act together to support country government. And here I want to, of course, acknowledge the commitment, contribution of the Canadian government. And of course, many others in this room have been putting in your resources in kind and in dollars. But so far, it has been a drop in the bucket. We really need to scale up. So having said that, I just want to give you a sense that how World Bank has been practicing what we are preaching. First of all, improving CRVS is a primary priority and issue that bank is committed to. I remember in May 2014, at the Canadian Prime Minister's summit, the Maternal, Newborn, and Child Health Summit, our president came and stressed how important he sees that every country should have a 21st century active, digital, and truly vital systems. So in order for us to stop mothers and young children from dying, we need to know who is dying and what causes it and where. This is why I'm really glad that also in 2014, I see my colleague Sam here, and he has been very instrumental working with the World Bank team together with WHO and other health partners and government, and launched the Global Civil Registration and Vital Statistics Scaling Up Plan, investment plan for 2015 to 2024. The goal of this plan is to have universal civil registration of births, deaths, marriages, and other vital events, including the cause of death. And I'm really glad that with the support of Canadian government, with the establishment of the Global Financing Facility, that this plan has been really being implemented with accelerating pace. I just learned that just in the past 2 years, we put in how much? Over $80 million with at least 7 countries in Africa and Asia, and really addressing from birth registration to cause of death and so on and so forth. And at the same time, gender, promoting gender equality, eradicate poverty, and promote inclusive growth is also a priority of the World Bank. Just less than 2 years ago, the bank adopted a gender strategy for 2016 to 2023, and it's really emphasized, the functioning registration system, how important it is to really recognize every woman and every child, and give them their chance in life. But at the same time, also emphasized more and better sex disaggregated data, particularly from household survey and the CRVS system, is absolutely important. So it's really at the bank, the gender strategy and the CRVS plan are strongly linked. But we all know improving CRVS systems is not just a health initiative. It's not a gender initiative. It's not a data initiative. It's really a broad development initiative. This is also why I'm really, really happy to see at the bank these 2 initiatives are also closely, intrinsically linked to a new initiative, which is identification for development. As we all know, an estimated over 1.1 million people do not have their legal identity clearly recognized, and without the proper identification document for them to access the basic life opportunities. This is why the bank initiated a cross-sectoral initiative to address this issue. It connects social protection, gender, financial inclusion, governance, legal, data, and digital development, and others all together to collectively and comprehensively getting into supporting countries to improve their registration and legal identity systems. And here, again, bank is playing 3 very important roles as thought leaders to support the cutting-edge research on the impact of improvement of legal identity and identification to improve a broad range of development outcomes, including gender equality, and to engage region and countries to support their adoption of new technology and legal framework and governance arrangement to improve identification for development. And here I got some hot numbers I want to share with you. And just in the past 2 years, the bank has already invested over $500 million. And again, during the ongoing IDA 18 cycle, another 750 have been committed to support countries. So I think this is just absolutely important. Another role that we're playing in this space is really as a donor to use our convening power to really leverage partnership to harmonize approaches, and including the introduction and adoption of a set of clear principles that are guiding our effort in this area. So I'm just really glad to see that Bank is really walking the talks. But it's only a beginning of a long-term initiative engagement. I'm really glad that we're here to talk about how really focus on leveraging all of these initiatives and also bring those initiatives together, including civil registration improvement as well as legal identity and digital identification initiative together to provide the basic infrastructure in the countries. It's not just about the data we're going to be able to generate and get from that system, but the broad range of benefit that we can render to every citizen in the world. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Haishan. Now we go to Oliver Chinganya, and Oliver is a chartered statistician with more than 28 years of experience in statistical development in Africa at national and international levels. He has wide experience and knowledge of statistical practices across Africa at both field and management levels. He's a Zambian national holding an MSc in statistics, MBA, and various other certifications, including statistics for strategic resource planning and leadership skills and competencies. He's currently a director of the African Center for Statistics at the UN Economic Commission for Africa, UNECA. Among other responsibilities, he manages the work of the Secretariat for the African Program on Accelerated Improvement of Civil Registration and Vital Statistics, API CRVS, working very closely with African Regional Core Groups Group for CRVS in supporting African countries to improve CRVS systems. Please welcome Oliver with me.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for that elaborate introduction, Kamal, Montasser. Also, just to thank IDRC for inviting me to this, to be part of the discussion here, but more importantly, also to recognize the support that they're providing to African countries in the CRVS, amongst other partners that are helping us. Maybe just to share a little story, as mentioned by Montasser, I joined the ECA some 22 months ago, and one of the things that I happened to have done was a workshop that I participated in Lusaka, and I was fortunate, or rather privileged, on that particular trip that I sat next to Minister of Finance, who now is actually the head of one of the political parties, and is a lady. And I was telling her about why I was going to Lusaka for this civil registration meeting, and why it is important to register deaths. I didn't realize at the time that she had actually lost a mother and she had not registered her mother. She looked sad and started sobbing, says, and what I told her was, look, there are people that have come on this earth and have left this earth without a trace. And when she heard this, that her own mother had come on earth and there's now no record of her having existed, she felt really bad and started crying over it. And this is this kind of invisibility that needs to be addressed, not only in Africa, but also in many other developing countries. And I think this is one good reason we're here, to see and seek solutions on how this scandal, or rather making invisibility invisible, to some extent possible. So having said that, and I think a lot of things that have been said, particularly by the three presenters this morning, when we heard from the RDC president, we also heard from the parliamentary secretary, we also heard from the various speakers, and they said a lot of things in terms of what is it that is being done in many of these countries. They talked about the integration of the gender into CRVS, the gaps that exist, and also the benefits of integrating gender in the statistics. And this just shows how important it is to ensure that gender is part of, or rather, a part of the process of civil registration. And as you can see from my slide, I think a lot of that has been said is that if we were to ensure that we have a complete and efficient civil registration, we have to make sure that we have data that is disaggregated by sex. But not just by sex, but beyond just sex, but to have to understand the gender issues around it. And secondly, also that the SDGs themselves, as was said this morning, about a third of those SDGs have to be informed by CRVS. So it means that if we get it right with the civil registration, we actually will have resolved or answered to a lot of questions within the civil registration, or rather within the SDGs. And also what was clear in the discussion, which is also in resonance with what is on the slide there, is that if we have a well-functioning civil registration system, it means that there are a whole lot of accrued benefits in terms, especially if you have the women being accounted in terms of economic development and so forth. However, despite this recognition of the importance of civil registration, there's a lot more that needs to be done, and particularly for African countries, where we have seen a lot of gaps, and some of it probably will be shared here, and I'll probably be saying some of it within the discussion. Now, in terms of what we are doing at ECA, first of all, I didn't mention that, although that was already elaborated by Montasser, that the ECA, we host what is called the APIA CRVS. This is the African Program on Accelerated Improvement for Civil Registration. And that sits in the office of the Center of Statistics, which I'm responsible for. And we coordinate all the activities on CRVS on the continent, and working very closely, as was alluded by Montasser, with the regional core group. This is a custodia, if you like, a group of people or agencies that have come together to support in various ways the CRVS on the continent. And the Center of Excellence is one of them that has just joined this core group, and I would want to thank that they made the request to be a part of it. So in working closely with the core group, one of the things that we do is to provide capacity in countries, sustainable capacity in countries, in terms of developing the necessary instrument that they require to guide the processes of developing the systems in the countries, providing necessary support to develop the manuals and other tools that are required, and so forth. And in addition to that, we just don't do it with the only people within the core group, but there are also other players that we work with. And as I speak right now, there are actually ongoing discussion within the implementers of CRVS on how we can improve the current manuals and training materials that we have to respond to emerging issues. And in particular, how do we integrate gender issues? Most of the materials that we develop, yes, they do have information on sex disaggregated, but sex disaggregated is not gender. We need to go beyond just sex disaggregate data. Because most times there's a confusion when people talk about gender, they're associated with sex, and that's not the case. There are two different issues altogether. So there is need to actually revise these instruments so that they are able to take into account issues of gender and also be able to account it properly. We are also doing some work with Data 2X. And this is a project that is aimed at introducing some of the innovations in terms of collecting and managing the dissemination of the data that is required, and particularly around marriage, registration, as well as divorce, and so forth. Now, in terms of next steps, I somewhat mixing them together because you'll see already, because of the constraints and challenges that we face, there are also opportunities that we see. And therefore, in going forward, one of the things that we wanted to do in addressing these gaps of gender in particular is we'd like to have a country assessment by, first of all, conducting a pilot in 3 countries, and to be able to assess or identify the country's legal environment around these instruments that are there, the cultural barriers that are around, in affecting the registration of both divorce and other events. We also want to look at the country's socio-economic and legal frameworks that are there. what are the barriers? What is causing people not to be able to register and so forth? And what are the other infrastructures that may be inhibiting those that are supposed to be registered to be able to register? And also want to look at the gender biases. As I mentioned, that there are two different things when you look at sex as well as gender. What are the gender biases within the legal framework that needs to be revised? And also looking at the current practices in terms of how we capture marriage as well as divorce registration. Once this is done, one of the things that we intend to do is how do we expand the comprehensive assessment that is already going on at the moment, and that which we have already done previously, so to make sure that we integrate these issues of gender much more in a much more robust manner than we have done in the past, and also to be able to develop regional assessment guidelines, undertake advisory services again to countries to support them, and also be able to disseminate the result that comes out of this case study or pilots, and use these best practices to be able to populate to other countries that are equally doing the same. Now, in terms of conclusion, one of the things that we would like to do is that based on the outcome of the study that I alluded to, we want to review the guidelines, the instruments that we have to ensure that they have all the necessary entities or elements to be able to incorporate the issues of gender dimension, and also review and develop a much more robust strategy to mainstream gender issues and being able to collect the information on an annual basis. However, all these things that I've mentioned, integration of gender is not a cheap exercise. It's going to be very costly. And this is something that we need to recognize, that if we all realize the benefits of gender into the economic development, it means it's an exercise that all of us have to buy in. And this will require resources. And when we talk about developing countries, these are countries that are highly challenged in many ways, both in terms of capacity, the IT infrastructure, the legal framework, and the human capacity itself. So it will require financing to be able to, if at all we have to make a difference, and especially if we are talking about the Agenda 2030 being attained, it means certain things have to be done in a manner that will make us realize the goals. The other part of it is the issue of partnership. And here I'm talking about trusted partnership. Partnership can be with any person, but is it a trusted partnership? You can be in a relationship, but is it a trustful partnership? So we have to identify partners that believe in what we want to do, who trust, and we can trust that they are coming in to actually help us make a difference. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oliver. Now we come to our final speaker, Jaime Bulande Guta. Dr. Guta is the National Director of Registry and Notary in Mozambique. He has 20 years of professional experience in civil registration. He was previously the Director of Criminal Registration in Maputo and holds his current post since 2016. He holds a Master in Marine Law and an Honors in Law. Thank you very much for welcoming him with me to the podium.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. Wide making invisible to visible. My problem was the language to invisible to invisible. But I try to make your view in this game. The family gender has disadvantage in Mozambique, mainly due to cultural customs. With lack of civil registration, special birth registration, precipitated the premature marriage. Some serve as means of payment of some debts incurred by parents. Some children serve as family supported mechanism that they are more often sent to work early, and the parents do not see the benefits of investing in their registration. With the lack of registration, they lose multiple advantage in access to education and the other benefits. The lack of women and empowerment in Mozambique also influences the mother to not feel empowered to herself take to baby for registration. During the prenatal care, the mother needs to learn the importance. And now in this question in Mozambique, to introduce it, the electronic registration, and in this program help us the UNICEF and the government of Canada. Thank you for this. And the result of the electronic registration is very good, but now it's a experimental phase. I think that the causes of the registration and the difficult of registration is identified. And the problem now was the fighting for and the result. Was my few rich in this that I think that thank you for very much.
Maybe I'll speak from here. So thank you very much for our speakers. We now have half hour or almost half hour for the conversation, which is great. Please come to the mic to speak. We also we have 3 mics here. We also will be inviting or waiting for questions if any questions come online, and we have our team here in the back will wave a flag if there are questions coming online. So please, the floor is yours for questions. I have some questions, but I don't want to monopolize the floor. So please come invite the participants to ask your questions. Okay, everything is very clear. Please come to the microphone. And if you could identify yourself as well, so we all know who's speaking.
Well, I do have a birth certificate. So.
Okay, good.
I'm Sanjay Dharwadkar from WCC Netherlands. We do some consultancy work for the CRVS with the World Bank. Sorry, because there were no other questions, I thought I'll ask this. This is a very nitty-gritty question. I come from the systems side, and no matter how well I count the births and the deaths, finally you end up with a denominator which says you only counted 80% of the births. So because I had such a luminary of statisticians here, what is the state of art? I mean, how do you do that estimation of how many births or deaths there should be in a country or in a region? Is it the census, is it the household, or is it a combination of all that? Sorry, have I been asked a very stupid question?
Okay, thank you. Do you have a particular speaker you want to target with your question?
I thought Francesca.
Okay, great.
Sorry.
Okay, so maybe we'll take a few questions. Okay, maybe we'll take a few questions and then we'll ask the speakers to respond. Please.
Hi, everybody. My name's Annika Schmeider. I'm with Canada IDRC, and I guess everybody knew I was going to ask a question, right? One of the things, coming to this conference, it really shocked me, actually, for as long as I've been into CRVS with a lot of my global colleagues, that we have not addressed the issue of gender bias in design of these CRVS systems before. And I'm horrified myself that I helped with the CRVS assessment process all those years ago, and we didn't have an underpinning about gender in the data collection process. And, you know, when we're looking at integrated systems and investments and so on, it horrifies me actually now, I can say this very openly, that we have not actually put this in. And so the risk is that we're investing in systems that are actually biased and will continue to be biased for a long time. Right, so that's the challenge to myself, and I do feel a bit horrified. The question I wanted to ask, and being ex-WHO, where are my health statistics colleagues in this discussion? Right, so we're talking about integrated systems, we're talking about using surveys and estimates and so on. You know, there are health collection systems that absolutely need to be strengthened, and we know have really strong links to CRVS systems. I'm just making a case. I think we need to integrate them much more strongly in the conversation now and for women's benefit. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Aika. Other questions? Okay. Yes, please come to the microphone.
Thank you all very much for very interesting interventions. My name is Marwan Khawaja, and I come from the UNFPA Regional Commission for Western Asia. I'm from statistics. I just wanted to, in my region and many parts of the world, there is actually, this is very particular times, very difficult times, because of the war and conflict going on, and registration of refugees, displaced person is challenging. We don't actually have recommendations as yet in statistics on how to deal with this. I think in the next week or so, UNHCR with other agencies have developed recommendations for the Statistical Commission to adopt on refugee statistics. And I do want to mention here, in particular, the issue of marriage and divorce. It's actually very important in our region, and it has implication also for birth and death registration, as Rachel mentioned. And in our region in particular, you know, the courts are, personal status law is actually in the hands of the religious courts. So that registration goes on, but linking it to the civil registration and also to the statistical system is more challenging. So for Syrian refugees, in particular in Lebanon and Jordan, many of these marriages and divorces, of course, takes place by and large in the courts. So they're registered in the courts, but registering them in the host country and also for documentation in the sending country, in Syria, for example, is of particular challenge. We don't actually know. We don't have much evidence on this particular topic, although there are several surveys, household surveys, have been conducted on vulnerability by the bank and also by UNHCR, but this issue has not been given the attention it is given. I also want to mention some special, maybe not very common practice in our region, which is customary marriage, and that takes place unofficially. It's actually prevalent, especially among some sects, religious sects, such as, for example, Shiites. There is the muta marriage. In parts of some countries in our region, they have this prevalent marriage, which is sanctioned but not registered. And it has huge implications for rights and what have you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marwan. Melissa? Okay, we'll take one more question and then we'll take some responses from the panel.
Thank you very much to the panelists. I think it was a very interesting discussion. I just want to comment on...
To introduce yourself,
Oh,
please.
sorry. I'm Malitela Duanenghasi. I'm with the Global Financing Facility, GFF, working on civil registration and vital statistics. And previously, I was working in Statistics South Africa, responsible for this producing vital statistics from the civil registration system. And I'm basically here to respond to Francesca's question on on customary marriages statistics. Just to say, following the legislation, there was that huge increase in the number of customary marriages that were getting registered, around 20,000 on an annual basis. That was around 2003. But currently, if you look at the customary marriages, it has gone down. It's almost 3,400 now. So it's over 50% decrease in the number of customary marriages that are registered. And because it's a civil registration data, it's administrative data, you don't really get into why is this happening, because you're just looking at this from an administrative point of view, but there has been that decline. But what is on the other hand is the increase in the number of civil unions. Civil unions, it's mainly same-sex marriages. Of course, you can still do that, even if it's not same-sex marriages, but that is what has consistently increased following the approval of the legislation. So that I wanted to comment on that. But I also wanted to make, from a gender perspective, the details of parents at the time of a child's birth registration. Where information is available, particularly in developing countries, most children will have details of the mother in the civil register. But if I make an example of South Africa, over 2/3 of the children that are registered do not have details of their fathers. So most children will have mothers in their birth certificates, but they will not have details of their fathers, which I think it's a gender issue, but also you can't really deny registering a child if there are no details of the father. So how do we get this in? Because eventually it catches up with the children when they don't have such kind of details in their birth certificates. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Malatella. So I see you're debating there, Rachel and Francesca. So would you like to start? Maybe Rachel, do you have something?
Yes, I'll make a stab at your question, but I think there are better demographers down the chairs here. But in very simple terms, nothing is the gold standard. I hate to say it, but I don't think it's the case. So the census is excellent. It's our most comprehensive source. But of course, there are people who are missing in the census as well, no question about it. But if you have two censuses 10 years apart, there is and it's some form of civil registration system, you can look at the annual births and annual deaths and ask yourself, from the context of these two, with assuming consistent coverage between the two censuses, which is a problematic assumption perhaps, were in fact there an absence of, say, unregistered deaths. Yeah, that's where I say that the DHS and the mix are very helpful, because if they can offer you an estimation of the coverage of birth registration between those two censuses, you have some estimation of how to make an adjustment there, and then it exposes, so to speak, where you are missing in terms of death registration. That's all the true and kind of reasonable. If you have also migration, minimal. Yeah, and this is, I think, what Mirwan has taken us. Has mentioned so clearly, is that the challenge of a lot of cross-border movement becomes incredibly difficult in terms of knowing what do we say is the best, the gold standard, and where is validity, so to speak. But I'll be curious how others may augment that. I also wanted to mention, in response to the colleague from Stats South Africa, I think it's really interesting, your comment, because one raises the question of whether, in fact, the registration of the customary is going down, in part because the civil registration of the marriages is going up, what's left behind, and it would be great to do some much closer analysis together on that and understand what's been the motivations and the incentive systems in both directions. And I will leave it there for others. Yeah. Thank you.
Francesca?
Yes, thank you. Just to add on the first question to what Rachel was saying, we do use in the SDGs, the two indicators are based on both sources. You have on the goal 16, we count from the surveys, from the DHS and mixed surveys, the percentage of those registered. So it comes from the questionnaire. And then in goal 17, and I'm looking at my colleague surgeon here, the data are the sort of official data coming from our data collection directly from countries, from the demographic yearbook. And I don't know if surgeon wants to add something there. Those are the two tools that Rachel was mentioning. And again, you know, there is no perfect reporting on either of them, but the two are complementary in a sense. I also would like to say something about the issue of the bias. Yes, there are bias in the reporting. And I think we covered, all of us have somehow mentioned some aspects or others in terms of what gets reported and the difficulties in refugee camps, the registration of especially marriages and divorce, and registration of deaths. We all know women tend to be underreported, deaths of women, etc. But I'd like to say we're not funding the bias. We actually, from the UN, we have a very well-developed system of principles and recommendations, and there are a long series of training programs undertaken in countries where we're actually promoting the right approach to it. We're not, I don't think we're funding sort of a process or a system or recommendations that are biased. The bias happens throughout the registration process because of customary issues of discrimination, women's discrimination in the country, etc. So I think, I mean, the instruments are there. It's how we present them and how we make sure those are visible and understood and well implemented. But again, the big expert is sitting there, the one who's been working for many years on these issues and developing the principles and the recommendations. If you want to add anything, Sergeant. If I may, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt the discussion here. My name is Srđan Mrkić. I'm from the United Nations Statistics Division, and I have been working with both population censuses and the civil registration vital statistics for quite some time now. So the first question is, how do we get the real number? We do have a gold standard, actually. It is a universal and complete civil registration. Yeah. Which means, I'm sorry, Rachel, but we do have a gold standard. And essentially that means that the civil registration is universal, is mandatory, yes, and all the vital events, and we are mentioning here births and deaths, but we do have essentially 9 events that are recommended by the United Nations that have to be registered, including the adoptions, legitimations, and so on and so forth. So the only way of getting comprehensive, reliable statistics is to register every single occurrence of these events. How to do it? By having a civil registration that is universal and mandatory. So this is the kind of standard that we are promoting. This is the standard that you can find in the population censuses recommendations and the standard in the civil registration and vital statistics recommendations as well. Now, I would just like to reiterate what Francesca said about the bias. The design is not biased. The design is actually very gender neutral. It says that you have to register every single event, irrespective of the sex of either the births or the deaths. But when the bias comes into the play when we implement those at the national level, because of different circumstances, the preference of having male babies and so on and so forth. So we know all of that, but the design itself is not biased. The implementation is. So I will stop here, and then, of course, because there is a lot.
Thank you very much. Other panelists, would you like to add anything? Olive, yes. Haishan?
Go ahead.
Oliver,
I hope I can be heard. Yes.
Oliver, go ahead.
I think so much has been said, and and it's true. There's a standard. There is the issue of universality, but the biggest problem is compliance. And here what I'm referring to is that when we talk about biases, we have cultural biases where in some cases we have cultures which do not allow a child to be registered until attains a certain age. And that's a problem. And if in the event, an unfortunate event, if this child dies, that's the end of the story of this child being registered. And this is why we need to start thinking out of the box in terms of innovations. What kind of innovations can we actually come up with which would allow these kinds of situations not to happen? And I think the issue of open CRVS and using the technology, perhaps by giving mobile telephones, some kind of gadgets, the village headman and so forth, some of this information can actually be captured without necessarily having to register or the name of the child, but at least give an ID. So I think we need to start looking at this. We do have standards, but what do we need to capture information that is likely to go through the cracks because of traditional biases?
Thank you very much. Haishan, did you want to add something?
No, I just... Very quick. I'm glad, Sergey, you settled the record. Indeed, I'm saying why we're here, and our goal to promote universal registration by 2030 is indeed to eradicate this dilemma that you're facing, given the current imperfect system meant that no single source could give us the reliable statistics. And on the issue of biases, either in design or in implementation, I think that comes back again to we need to understand what's happening in different settings, in different circumstances, and what could be the remedy that we can help introduce. But I want to comment on the question that you raised regarding how difficult it is to register the vital events, life events among people who are in some of the most difficult circumstances, and especially the refugees. And definitely here, the conventional approach is not really working, and we will need to be much more proactive and much more innovative in using other options. And here I want to mention two things. One is the World Bank and UNHCR has announced a joint initiative to establish a data center to precisely look into how we can best generate reliable statistics regarding refugees, their movement, their life circumstances, and so on and so forth. And here, I think it's opened up a huge space for us to collaborate to find better ways to support them. Second, that many of you might have heard, in the past couple of years, the World Bank has been working very closely with the Global Partnership for Sustainable Development Data and channeling some financing towards data innovation. And we have just announced the second round of projects being supported by that. During the first round, there's one of the 10 projects is about how to use mobile technology as well, geospatial information, to help monitor the Syrian refugees' movement and better register their vital events. So I'm just saying that we really, really need to work together to look at what are the new innovative approaches for us to address some of the most difficult situations.
Thank you, Haishan. Jaime, do you want to add anything? Okay. Maybe, Haishan, while you have the floor, I have a question. You mentioned about the need for research on sort of the gender, the benefits of CRVS systems for gender, on gender issues. So is this something that you think the bank is going to take on? Is this something that you think there could benefit from further discussions? Just could you elaborate a little bit more?
I think this is definitely bank will support research in this area, and I'm really glad Sam is sitting there and he has been working a lot, and also partly benefiting from the contribution of Canadian government and managing the global financing facility. We're also supporting this way, the Center of Excellence. I think we can indeed collaborate and work together to see where we can channel more resources and to target what priority issues. But I don't think this is one player's job. That's why we have a whole community here that we need to look very proactively into where we need what kind of research and collaborate and channel resources and expertise to do so. We will be very happy to continue this discussion and see how we can foster that.
Great. Thank you very much. Oliver, do you want to this point?
Yes, on this at some point. I think this is also an area where we are interested, and just to register that just last week with the Global Partnership on Sustainable Development, we're thinking of innovative ways of doing a study around the economic values and social values of CRVS, and I think that she rightly said, I think this is not just an issue between the Global Partnership and others. I think it will require many more others to come, because I think the analysis and the methodology that is required may be very, very complex, and I think having to bring heads together and sort of really think through what kind of variables do we want to put in place in measuring these economic and social values of CRVS. So I think, yes, we'll be willing to do that. We just had a meeting last week with the Global Partnership on this.
Yeah, maybe just quickly add to that. I remember when we were working in Asia Pacific to create this regional movement of improvement of CRVS, we quickly come to a realization that we advocate, we argue, but we don't have sufficient research. That's why under the regional program, we developed a research agenda. I think it was published in a journal 5 years ago. To identify a whole series of issues we felt that as a community we have not come to grip with sufficiently, and we would like to promote that. So I think there's some very good starting point, and again I want to credit Data2X for having really invested and conducted some of very important research both in Asia Pacific and in Africa for us to understand the situation better.
Great. Maybe I'll ask Oliver. Please come to the microphone. If anyone has questions, please come to the microphone. I'll save my question to Oliver for later. Please come in.
Muriel Gomes, University of Toronto. I particularly work on strengthening causes of death in parts of Africa and Asia. And my questions focused around cause of death statistics, particularly in the light of Ebola, where caregivers were mostly women and the epidemic spread quite drastically, and a definite gender bias in the cause of death metrics. My question is, what is an envisioned roadmap for causes of death? Because, for example, in the US, it took about 100 years for everyone to die in the hospital. So if we have a lot of 70 to 80% of deaths happening at home, as well as the hospital, in order to get complete registration of causes of death, we'll have to wait until everybody dies in the hospital. So are these hybrid systems of surveys, such as verbal autopsies, as well as other forms of cause of death registration, and an envisioned model in the years to come?
Thank you. There are other questions? Please come to the mic.
Hello, thank you to all the speakers. Great discussion. My name's Anina Wersen, and I'm responsible for, I work for Plan International, and I'm responsible for our digital birth registration programs. I wanted to follow up on the interesting discussion around, well, obviously the need for financing, the conversation that Oliver mentioned around the creation of this business case for civil registration. And in line with the focus on gender, I wanted to ask what you think the role of the private sector should be. We have a fantastic mix of people in this room, but we know what the value of data can be, and how we could, partner with the private sector to increase that value, increase financing, and also strengthen the focus on gender through the private sector. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And last question, please.
Thank you. My name is Albert Modavant, and I'm with Equal Measures 2030, which is an initiative which is bringing these data to the ground, and bringing to advocates and to decision makers. I guess I wanted to come to the issue of the finances too, because we've heard a lot about. I think the panel really well described the benefits and the many benefits, and how this is a win-win-win. So, what are the obstacles to actually implementing this? And you touched upon some of these already around political commitment, around legal systems, institutional capacity, and so on. And some speakers also spoke to the financial question and the costs of this. So I was just wondering, what is the state of the art in terms of, I mean, for example, talking to your finance minister, or talking to ministers in Africa, or to bank counterparts who are considering moving ahead, or at the UNSD or at UNFPA. I think this is like the argument that you have to have in your pocket to say that, okay, well, these are the benefits and here are the possible costs. And of course we know the costs will change depending on the context. There's more remote areas, et cetera, et cetera. But is there some way to say, well, this is something like, I don't know, 10 mixed surveys or 20 mixed surveys, that you can have a basic system in place for the cost? What would it cost? What's the evidence? What do you say to your counterparts in governments?
Thank you very much. I'm going to invite the panelists to speak, to respond to these points and quickly. But I also want to add my last question, which to wrap back or to loop back into my first remarks, which is how can we make this work more, design the work in a way that is more empowering for women? They're not just the responders, they're not just the people that go to register their children or hopefully go to register their marriages or deaths of family members, but also how can we support them to be agents of change, to be empowered, to be agents of change and support for stronger CRVS systems. So maybe we'll just go the sequence of the speakers to respond to these questions if you can, and to my point, please.
Yeah, let me focus just on exposing the extent to which there's undercoverage and need. I think it's, many people have spoken to the need for both do that and then to look at the consequences. So I would certainly underscore the need to do so as a kind of first step. But I also wonder how much money we really need. I know that's kind of an unpopular comment sometimes, but when you think about what's coming forward in the terms of the 2020 round of census, the potential to, in fact, mobilize ongoing national efforts is, it's a big political commitment. But if so, that would quickly, in certain countries, give us a great deal more information about coverage needs and the situation women are, let's say, where they stand in terms of civil versus customary marriage and the extent to which any of those are registered. So I'm always, again, looking for the low-hanging fruit, some opportunities where we can, with relatively low cost and a great deal of political engagement in countries at the ground with governments, be able to do more with relatively less. Isn't that the UN creed at the moment anyway? So let me leave it there. But I think that's, from my perspective, where we need to be focused. And that doesn't speak to a lot of the other needs, but in terms of generating new data, I think we have opportunities we're really underutilizing that are not enormous cost. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. Francesca?
Yes, on the issue of financing, CRVS were already there during the MDG period. We were advocating for better systems. But what happened there was that donors were not interested. And in fact, donors were pushing us back and saying, mostly they were interested in immediate results. And CRVS are not easy and quick to strengthen and to get results immediately. So I think that was one challenge. And I think now we have the momentum. And what we have that is different now is that we have partnerships with the private sector. We have the global partnership working closely with us, with the UN system. We can bring all these different actors together. And I think we have to be also strong in showing the impact, and Data2X is doing exactly that, and I think we need more of that, showing the impact, what can be achieved with CRVS, with stronger systems. We need to make the case for CRVS not just as a data source, but as a lot more than that. In terms of good governance and protecting women's rights especially, so if you want to bring the gender perspective. But again, it's still a challenge because still it's not just, of course, the political commitment at the national level where the government has to agree, and the finance ministers, and of course we have to talk to all those people. But where we saw change and where we saw progress, where with the big donors were interested and were willing to come in and help. And CRVS was not the case for many, many years. Because of that, that's what I hinted at in the striking the balance between the household surveys. You know, it's the usual question. What do I do? I have X. What do I do? What do I spend the money for? And one thing that we didn't mention is also the cost to people going to register. And they, you know, very often in developing countries, that's all on them. Women die giving birth because they don't have money to go to the hospital because it's like 50 kilometers away. So I think we also have to keep that in mind.
Thank you very much. Sure. Thank you very much, Haishan.
First, in response to your question about improving registration and empowering women and promoting gender equality, here I want to mention two things. I almost wanted to show a little video. It was produced in Uganda of a cross-border traders, smallholders, how this woman, after having their identity recognized and having been issued a national ID, they were able to cross the border to their neighboring countries to trade, and how much pride you will see they felt that I am so-and-so, now I have this recognized, and I go there, I can trade based on their trust in my identity, and then I bring other goods back into my own countries, and how their life has changed, and how empowered they felt. Second example in Pakistan, when women were given the legal identity and digital identification, they were able to receive their subsidies or cash transfers that before would be monopolized by their male relatives, and now they have control over how they spend their money. And then you will see the investment in the household, in education and healthcare services has increased. That is real empowerment. So this is what we're talking about. So that's why I feel that we really need to look at this issue in this much broader perspective. And this relates to my second question. Is it worth it to invest in civil registration, vital statistics system, vis-a-vis investing in surveys and censuses? That's a wrong question to ask. To improve civil registration identity system is not just about the data that we will get, but rather what benefit it renders to everyone, women or men or children or adults. It's tremendous. If you look at when you have a digital ID, what allow you to access, and how with the trust and verifiable ID that you can open doors to your lives and to the children to your children's, that's the broad benefit we have to look at. That's why investing in it is so worthwhile. But if we do have functioning registration system, we have the right identification system, we will have tremendous amount of data, not just vital statistics, but the whole host of administrative record and services record and so on and so forth. That will become such a tremendous value to our development discourse, and that's what we have to look at. So therefore, I think trading investment in civil registration vis-a-vis investing in survey and others, it's a wrong question to ask because we haven't really valued the broader benefit to development.
Thank you very much, Haishan. We have 1 minute to go, so Oliver.
Thank you. Let me squeeze that and two responses to the 1 minute. First of all, I think everyone else in the room agrees that civil registration is important. But the question we want to ask ourselves, is it a priority? We all say it's important, but is it at the top of the list? And that's the big question that we have at national governments, whether this is something they actually put their money on to make sure that there's something. And this is the reason I think we want to advocate for a value for the actual economic benefit for it. And I think that if we're able to show that there are social and economic benefit value for the CRVS, perhaps this is a tool that we can take to the government and say, look, these are the good things why you should do this, and that this is what is going to do the, ultimately to the overall humanity within the country. That's one. And I think this then brings in the private sector part. And that's, how can we engage the private sector? I think the private sector have a lot to benefit out of this. Because if they are able to track information about, in the long run, in terms of who is going to be there, and who is around and so forth, it means they're able even to estimate in the long run in terms of the turnover. And therefore, as part of the corporate social responsibility, the onus is on them to actually begin to invest by providing the necessary gadgets, for instance, like telephones. This thing we're talking about, open CRVS, registering really at the, at the grassroots where things are happening. And I think that's why we need them. They have the IT, they have the capacity to provide that IT, for instance, those who are in the, in the telephone business and so forth. And I think we can tap on them and be able to work with them very closely. Thank you
very much. Jaime, would you like to add?
For example, in Mozambique, and in the 3 months of the registration of children is free. Government investing in this registration. In the sector private to participate too in this registration.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So there are really some good examples. I think like all maybe good sessions, we end up with more questions or additional questions to the issue at hand. I want to thank the panelists very much for their participation and their contribution.